I was standing backstage in front of thousands. The lights, the music, the crowd. It should have felt like a high point. But instead, it felt like nothing. My heart was flat. My soul tired. I smiled. Shook hands. Said the right things. But inside, I was asking a silent question I didn't dare say out loud. What if I've been doing all of this and still missed the point? That night, Jesus answered me. And what he said changed everything I thought I knew about love, faith, and what actually matters. The conference was over. Another whirlwind of people, handshakes, messages, testimonies. I had spoken 3 times that weekend. Each session felt like it landed. People clapped, some cried. I prayed with a few who lingered after. Even stayed late to encourage a young pastor who was ready to quit. It was the kind of weekend that looked like a spiritual success story. But as I sat alone in the green room, the silence swallowed me whole. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, staring at the carpet. Why did it all feel hollow? I had said the right things, meant them even. But underneath the smiles and the fire, something was missing. I could feel it in my chest like I had been giving and giving, but from a place I no longer remembered how to refill. I opened my Bible, then closed it, prayed a few quick words, then stopped. My soul didn't want performance. It wanted presence, and it scared me how distant God felt in that moment. After all the sermons, all the worship, all the applause, I whispered without even thinking, Lord, what do you want from me? Really? No lightning, no answer, just stillness. And yet something shifted. Like a pause in heaven, my eyes traced the cracks in the wall across from me. The air in the room felt heavier now, but not suffocating, more like it was waiting. For something. For someone. And then it hit me. What if the thing I was missing wasn't a what, but a who? I didn't need more ministry. I didn't need more clarity. I didn't need to feel more spiritual. I just needed him, but I didn't know how to find him when I was this empty. That thought made me lean back, close my eyes, and for the first time in a long while, not try to perform, not try to fix it, just sit in the ache. And that's when I sensed it, that sacred quiet that comes before heaven speaks. A presence, gentle, heavy, holy. I didn't open my eyes. I didn't move. I just waited. Something was about to change. And deep down, I knew Jesus was already in the room. I didn't open my eyes right away. I was afraid that if I moved, it would vanish, that quiet sense of being watched, not with scrutiny, but with understanding. The air felt thick, like the atmosphere had changed, like the room wasn't just a room anymore. I didn't hear footsteps. There was no dramatic entrance, but I knew, without knowing how, that I wasn't alone. And I don't mean that in a vague spiritual way. I mean he was here. Not the idea of him. Not the memory. Jesus. I kept my eyes closed. Partly out of reverence. Partly out of fear. Not the kind that makes you want to run, the kind that makes you want to fall on your face. In that moment, everything felt exposed. Like he could see every hidden motive, every silent frustration, every good deed done out of pressure. Not love. My chest tightened. I thought about what I had just asked. What do you really want from me? I didn't expect a response. And yet here he was, still silent. But there, I slowly opened my eyes, afraid of what I might see or not see. He wasn't glowing. He wasn't floating. He was just standing in the corner of the room, looking right at me. His face didn't carry judgment, but it didn't carry flattery either. Just, gentle, clear, unavoidable truth. He took a step closer. And with it came something I couldn't explain, the sensation of being fully known. Not just in the good ways. Known in the places I hide. Known in the parts I don't even let myself process. My mind raced through everything I'd done over the past year. The ministry events. The moments I pushed through exhaustion. The prayers I prayed more out of habit than hunger. The applause. The interviews. The weariness. The fear that I was becoming a machine that made people feel spiritual while slowly forgetting how to actually be with God. And now, here he was, not condemning me for it, just seeing it. All of it. I didn't speak. I couldn't. He didn't either, not yet. He just kept his eyes on me. Eyes so clear they made me want to confess things I hadn't even named. That's when I realized. He wasn't here to demand more. He wasn't here to hand me another task, or rebuke me, or tell me how to fix it all. He was here to answer the question I had asked in desperation, but not with a lecture. Not with a plan. Just with his presence. And somehow, that alone was already starting to undo me. The silence between us was the kind that speaks louder than sound. Jesus hadn't said a word, but something in me had already started breaking. It wasn't a violent shattering, more like something sacred unraveling thread by thread. I sat there, barely breathing, my eyes locked on his. No flicker of movement, no blink, just this steady, holy stillness that pierced deeper than any sermon ever could. His presence didn't demand, it revealed. And in that revelation, I felt the weight of how far I had drifted while thinking I was close. I had filled my days with godly things, said the right words, carried the name of Jesus, but somewhere along the way, I had lost the face behind it. And now that face was looking at me. He moved again. Just one step closer. And I swear, it felt like the whole room shifted. My chest tightened as memories started flashing, not visions, but scenes I had buried. Moments I'd been too busy to grieve. Conversations I'd brushed past to get to the next task. People I'd ministered to without actually being with them. All of it came flooding back. Not with shame, but with clarity. Like he was showing me what I had been too distracted to see. And still, not a single word. That was the part that undid me the most. He wasn't using scripture to correct me. He wasn't listing my failures or giving me a speech. He was simply letting the silence do what words never could, expose the ache beneath the noise. I lowered my eyes, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't feel worthy to keep looking. And yet, the moment I did, I felt him sit down beside me. Not across from me. Beside me, like a friend. Like a brother. Like someone who wasn't trying to fix me, but just be with me. I didn't expect that. I thought holy moments came with fire and thunder. This came with nearness. He was close enough now that I could feel the heat of his presence. And that heat wasn't burning me, it was melting the parts of me that had grown cold. I finally opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out, just tears. Quiet, stubborn tears I hadn't let fall in years. He didn't interrupt them. He didn't rush me. He just stayed. And in that moment, I realized something that both convicted and comforted me. Jesus didn't need my answers. He just wanted my heart. Not the polished version, not the strong, put-together speaker version. Just my heart. Raw, weak, open. And maybe for the first time in a long time, I was ready to give it. I didn't realize how long I had been crying until I felt the silence shift again. Not the kind that surrounds a moment, the kind that marks a turning point. I wiped my face slowly, and when I looked back up, he was no longer sitting beside me. He was standing again, just a few feet in front of me now. But something was different. His eyes. I had never seen eyes like that. They weren't just looking at me, they were reading me. Not judging, not scanning, just seeing. Seeing everything. The surface things, the private things, the contradictions, the fears I dressed up in bold words, and I realized, with a kind of trembling peace, that there was nothing I could hide from him, nothing I needed to hide. His gaze didn't feel like light exposing a criminal. It felt like light finding a lost child. My instinct was to speak, to explain myself, to fill the silence with reasons why I've been tired, why I kept showing up, why I buried my emptiness under schedules and sermons. But he didn't ask me to explain. His eyes already held the answers I didn't know how to form. It felt like time slowed in that space. Every breath was heavy with something eternal. And then he finally spoke. Just one line, one sentence that unraveled me more than any long speech ever could. He said, "You've given me your words, your works, but not your heart." It wasn't an accusation. It was a diagnosis. The words didn't crush me. They freed me. Because in that moment, he was right. I had learned how to give God my best without giving him my deepest. I had learned how to sound close to him without being close to him. I had loved the mission, the movement, the ministry, but I had forgotten how to simply love him. I looked down again, ashamed but also grateful, because finally, the ache inside me had a name, and he had named it with kindness. I didn't know what to say. I didn't have an apology ready. All I could do was nod, slowly, like a child who had just been found, and I felt his presence soften again, like a wave that had made its point, now gently receding. He didn't move away from me, but I felt the weight of what he said settle into my bones. I wasn't here to be corrected. I was here to be reclaimed. He still wanted my heart, even now, especially now. And the strangest part? That invitation didn't feel like pressure. It felt like peace. I wanted to speak, to tell him I was sorry, to promise I'd do better. But the words got stuck somewhere between my chest and my throat. He had just said the thing I didn't even know I needed to hear. That I had given him everything except the one thing he actually wanted. My heart. And somehow, that one sentence pulled a thread I didn't know was holding so much together. I sat there, staring at the ground. Not out of guilt, but because something inside me was breaking, not in despair, but in release. The kind of breaking that sets you free. Jesus stepped toward me again, and when he did, something shifted in the room. It was like the walls themselves pulled back, or maybe reality just thinned, because suddenly, I wasn't in the green room anymore. At least, not fully. I was somewhere else. A wide, dimly lit hallway stretched out around us, and on both sides were shelves, rows and rows of shelves, like a personal archive, but not dusty or forgotten. Everything here was perfectly organized, labeled, stacked. My name was written on the edge of each section. Sermons, projects, travel, conversations, intercessions, ministries, memories. There were folders, journals, photos, pieces of my life I hadn't thought about in years. I looked around in awe, confused but oddly calm. Jesus didn't say anything. He just walked slowly ahead, letting me follow. I ran my fingers across some of the shelves. It felt too real to be symbolic. This was my life, my history, every effort, every offering, every day I tried. And it was all here, preserved, documented, not one thing forgotten. I expected to feel pride, or maybe shame. But what I felt was something else entirely: sadness. Not because these things were bad, but because they felt cold, clean, impressive, but untouched by love. Like an exhibit that was visited but never lived in. I looked at Jesus, waiting for him to comment, but he didn't. He just kept walking. Then he stopped in front of a door. Unlike the shelves, this door was glowing, faintly, and across the top, etched in quiet gold, were the words, "Undone Things." My heart skipped. I didn't want to go in. I didn't know what was behind that door. But I already knew it mattered more than everything I had just seen. Jesus placed his hand on the handle. Then he looked at me not with pressure, but with that same holy clarity. He wasn't dragging me in. He was inviting me to see what he'd seen all along. And even though I didn't feel ready, I nodded, because maybe this was where the real healing would begin. The door creaked open with a quiet weight, like it had been waiting for years to be touched. Inside, the room was dim and strangely still. No shelves, no trophies, just moments suspended, unfinished, unspoken. I stepped inside and immediately felt something shift inside my chest. It wasn't fear, it was grief, gentle, unexpected grief, as if this room held everything I had forgotten to carry. The air itself felt sacred, heavy with what could have been. On the floor lay fragments of memories I hadn't visited in a long time. A voicemail I never returned. A tear-streaked face I brushed past in an airport. A prayer request I nodded to but never truly brought before God. I knelt beside one scene and watched it play like a loop. A young man, sitting alone at a church service. I remembered him now. He had approached me once, right after I spoke. I smiled, gave him a handshake, said I'd follow up, but I never did. And now, here he was again, frozen in time, waiting for a kind of love I didn't take time to offer. Behind me, another image flickered, my mother's voice on the phone, asking if I was okay. I told her I was busy. I was always busy. Ministry, travel, doing the Lord's work. But I hadn't realized how often I had walked over hearts in the name of purpose. Jesus stood quietly in the corner. He wasn't angry. He wasn't disappointed. But he was honest. That same steady presence, watching me watch myself. I turned to him, ashamed. I didn't know. I whispered, "I thought I was doing good." He nodded, but in understanding. Then he spoke, barely above a whisper. "You were doing what you thought mattered most." His eyes softened, then held mine. "But I was always after what you thought could wait." That sentence hit something deep, because he was right. I had built a life around things I thought were urgent, while slowly silencing the gentle nudges, the inconvenient invitations to stop, to see, to love. This room wasn't a place of condemnation. It was a place of remembering. And in remembering, repenting. Not with shame, but with clarity. I wanted to gather all these fragments, redeem every moment, make it right, but I knew I couldn't go back. All I could do was start again from here. I looked around one last time, letting the room break me in the most holy way. Then I turned to Jesus. "What do I do now?" I asked. His face didn't change, but his eyes held an answer I didn't yet understand. And somehow, I knew the next room would show me. He didn't rush me out of the room. He let me linger. Jesus always lets you linger where your heart needs to break. I stood in the doorway for a long time, still feeling the ache of what I had seen. The room of undone things wasn't loud, but it echoed. Every missed moment still whispered. Every silence still spoke. I turned back once more before he gently touched my shoulder, not to push, just to remind me he was still there. I followed him down a narrow hallway, dimly lit, the walls now marked with softer colors. Like this part of the journey was quieter, not somber, but sacred. As we walked, I noticed something strange. My thoughts, usually full of clutter and questions, began to still. There were no arguments forming in my head, no self-defense, just a slow surrender. Jesus stopped in front of another door, smaller than the others, plain. No gold, no sign. Just wood, worn smooth from time. He looked at me, then turned the handle. Inside was a simple room, small, silent, and utterly unremarkable. No thrones, no books, just a wooden floor. Soft light coming from nowhere, and two chairs facing each other. It felt like a forgotten place. And yet, the moment I stepped in, I knew I was standing in the center of something holy. Jesus walked to one of the chairs and sat down, slowly, naturally, like he had done this 1,000 times. He gestured to the other seat. I didn't move at first. My legs felt heavy, not from fear, but from the realization of what this was. This wasn't a classroom. It wasn't a stage. It wasn't a pulpit or a podcast. This was intimacy. This was the place I had skipped over in my search for purpose. I finally walked over and sat down across from him. No sound, no instructions, just presence. He looked at me with the kind of love that doesn't need to prove itself. And I felt something inside me loosen like a grip I didn't know I had been clenching. His eyes searched mine, and he said, "This is where my favorites live." I blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" He smiled gently. "The ones who never left this room." It hit me like a soft wind that somehow knocked the air from my lungs. All the greatness I had chased, all the impact I thought he wanted from me, and here he was, showing me the place he valued most. A quiet room, no performance, just hearts facing hearts. I looked around again, feeling both small and incredibly seen. This wasn't where I had built my platform, but it was where I had first fallen in love with him. Years ago, before the noise, and I realized I never should have left. I sat in the chair across from him. But something in me hesitated to fully settle. It was like my body was present, but my soul wasn't sure if it had permission to rest. I looked at Jesus, waiting for instruction, for correction, for some call to action that would make this moment feel productive. But he didn't give me any of that. He just leaned in, his eyes filled with a calm so deep it almost felt like time stopped inside them. Then, without raising his voice, he said, "I never asked for your performance. I wanted your permission to love you where you're weakest." That sentence wrecked me. Not in a loud, dramatic way. It hit quietly, like a wave you don't see coming until it's already pulled you under. I had always assumed my weakness was something to conquer before I came close to God. I thought he wanted my strength, my growth, my consistency. But here he was, telling me he had been waiting for the one thing I was too afraid to give: my unguarded weakness. The part of me I thought would disqualify me from intimacy was the very part he came to sit with. Tears welled again, slower this time. Not from shame, but from relief. I didn't have to prove anything. Not here. Not with him. He already knew the parts of me I tried to hide behind sermons and service, the cracks in my identity, the exhaustion I masked with passion, the insecurity behind my confidence. And still, he stayed seated. Still, he wanted me. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. For the first time in what felt like years, I wasn't planning my next move. I wasn't building toward anything. I was just being. And I could feel him loving me right there, not for my gifts, not for my impact, not for the way I spoke about him, but for me. For the me he created before I ever had something to prove. When I opened my eyes again, he hadn't moved, but I had. Something had shifted inside of me. My heart felt raw, open, exposed, but safe. He reached across the space between us and placed his hand over mine. His touch wasn't electric. It was steady, warm, honest, like a father holding the hand of a child who had tried too hard to be an adult. And in that moment, I knew. This was the beginning of healing. Not through striving, not through answers, but through letting love come all the way in. Even into the places I swore I had to handle alone. The silence between us no longer felt heavy. It felt full. Full of things I didn't have language for, yet peace I didn't earn, mercy I couldn't explain, and a love that didn't blink when it saw the worst in me. I sat there, barely breathing, not wanting to break the stillness. Not because I was afraid of losing it, but because I didn't want to rush something that was finally healing me. Jesus stood slowly, his hand still resting briefly on mine before he let go. He looked at me as if to say, "There's something else I want to show you." I didn't ask where we were going. I just stood and followed. We stepped out of the quiet room into a hallway I hadn't seen before. It was darker now, but not in a fearful way. The light was soft, golden like candlelight in a cathedral. The floor beneath us felt like stone, and there was a faint echo with every step. At the end of the hall stood a large wooden door. Thick, worn, sacred. Without saying a word, Jesus opened it. Inside was the smallest throne room I had ever seen, and not at all what I expected. There were no high ceilings, no marble, no angels flanking the corners. Just one simple throne, not made of gold, but wood, carved with care. The walls were bare. No crowns, no banners. Only the soft hum of stillness that let you know this place was set apart. I looked around in confusion. Is this? I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't have to. Jesus nodded. This is where I reign, he said, in the hearts that stay hidden. The words didn't land all at once. They unfolded slowly. This wasn't the throne room of a king hungry for attention. This was the inner sanctuary of a king who ruled by presence, not spectacle. He walked toward the throne but didn't sit in it. Instead, he stood beside it and looked back at me. Most people think I sit in the loud places, he said gently. The platforms, the stages, the crowds. But I've always chosen this kind of throne, in quiet hearts, in surrendered rooms. I looked at the throne again and suddenly understood. It wasn't about ruling the world. It was about ruling me, my heart, my motives, my silence, my decisions, when no one's watching. And somehow, this small room, tucked away from everything grand, felt more powerful than all the conferences I had ever spoken at. Because in here, there was no applause, no validation, only Jesus, and that was enough. I stood in that small throne room, staring at the simple wooden seat. And something inside me finally broke in the right way. All the pressure I had carried for years to be strong, to be spiritual, to be enough, started melting off my shoulders like wax. I didn't need to impress him. I didn't need to climb any ladder. I just needed to be still long enough to let him rule where it mattered most. Jesus stepped closer, and I could feel the weight of his nearness again, not heavy like a burden, but full like belonging. His voice came soft, but clear. Let me love you. That's the one thing that matters. I blinked, unsure I had heard him right. All this time, I had built my life around the idea that what mattered most was what I did for him. How well I served. How hard I worked. How faithfully I carried the mission. And here he was, telling me that the center of it all wasn't my effort, it was his love. Not just as a concept, not as a message I preached, but as a reality I received. I wanted to argue, to ask about calling and discipline and obedience. But before I could say anything, he gently shook his head, as if he already knew what I was about to ask. All of those things grow out of love, he said, but they cannot replace it. When you start with love, everything else flows naturally. But when you start with striving, even the good things become heavy. I felt a lump rise in my throat. So much of my life had been lived in the name of God, but how much of it had been lived from the heart of God? I thought about all the times I had pushed through burnout, told myself I was just fighting the good fight, when really I was afraid to stop. Afraid that if I stopped performing, I would disappear. But Jesus wasn't asking me to disappear. He was asking me to return to the place where it was just Him and me. Before the titles, before the pressure, before the fear, just love. I looked at the throne again, then at Him. How do I start over? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, not with amusement, but with deep kindness. You don't have to start over. You just have to start here. And that's when it hit me. The one thing that matters isn't my performance, or my platform, or my progress. It's whether I'm letting Him love me in the quiet, in the chaos, in the parts I still don't understand. Because everything changes when love becomes the beginning, not the reward. The next thing I knew, I was back in the green room. Same cracked ceiling, same humming fluorescent light, same chair beneath me. But I wasn't the same. It felt like waking from a dream. Only this dream had opened my eyes. My hands were resting on my knees, palms open, and for a moment I just stared at them. They had done so much, held microphones, prayed over strangers, carried luggage through airports, written sermons late into the night. And yet, in all their motion, I had forgotten how to let them receive. I sat up slowly, half expecting Jesus to still be there in the room. But He wasn't, at least not in the way He had been before. Now His presence felt deeper, quieter, not outside of me but within, a warmth in my chest, a stillness I didn't want to disturb. For a while I just breathed, letting everything settle. The schedule didn't matter anymore. The stage didn't matter. My mind wasn't racing to the next thing. It was still. I stood and walked to the mirror across the room. My reflection stared back at me, eyes red, face tired, but peaceful. Not numb, not drained, just finally at rest. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the pressure to bring something to the world. I didn't need to have a message, or a word, or a revelation. I had been with Him, and that was enough. I reached for my phone, dozens of notifications lighting up the screen, texts, emails, social posts, all waiting. But I didn't open any of them. I turned the phone over and placed it face down on the counter. This moment wasn't meant to be interrupted. When I walked out of the green room and back into the hallway, the conference was still going. I could hear faint music from the main auditorium, voices, movement, life, but it didn't pull at me the way it used to. I didn't feel the need to be seen or needed. Someone passed by and said, "Hey, they're looking for you backstage." I nodded gently. "I'll be there in a minute." But I didn't rush. I found a quiet corner in the hallway and sat down again. Not to prepare, not to rehearse, just to be. And as I sat there, I felt Him again. His presence, soft and steady, like a hand on my shoulder. And I whispered, "Thank you." Because now I knew I wasn't walking back onto that stage as a performer. I wasn't returning as a voice trying to be heard. I was walking out as someone loved. And when you know you're loved by Him, you don't need the world to applaud. You just need to keep your heart open. The hallway was quiet now. I could still hear the distant rhythm of worship from the main stage, but it no longer pulled at me like a summons. It sounded more like a memory, beautiful, but no longer the center. I took one last breath and stood, not with urgency, but with peace. I didn't need to feel ready. I wasn't stepping into a role. I was simply returning, with a different heart. As I walked toward the side entrance, I passed by a mirror again. My reflection met me with a strange softness. Not confident in the way the world measures it, but grounded. There was no mask, no script, no pressure to perform. Just the quiet weight of having been with him. The door creaked as I stepped into the side wing of the auditorium. The lights were dim, the atmosphere reverent. A few people noticed me and gave a nod. I smiled, but not in the way I used to, not the polished speaker's smile that says, "I've got this." This one came from deeper, from a place of knowing I don't have to have it. Because he does. They handed me a microphone. I took it gently, my fingers still remembering the moment he had touched my hand. I stepped up to the edge of the stage. The lights didn't blind me this time. I saw faces, real people, some hungry, some tired, some pretending like I had been. I cleared my throat, but not to begin a message. I just wanted to breathe before I spoke. Then I said something I didn't plan. I said, before anything else tonight, I need to tell you, he doesn't want your stage. He wants your heart. Silence. No shouting. No applause. Just stillness. The kind that says something sacred has entered the room, and I let it linger. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't speaking for him. I was speaking with him. I looked around slowly, letting my eyes meet the crowd. Not to impress them, to invite them into the quiet place, into the throne room with no platform, into the kind of love that waits behind doors we forget to open. I ended with a prayer, but it wasn't one I had written. It just spilled out. Honest, bare, simple. And when I said amen, I knew something had shifted, not just in the room, but in me, because love had finally become the beginning, not the reward. And when Jesus told me the one thing that matters most, it wasn't a command. It wasn't a mission. It was an invitation to be loved and to live from that place. Always. And maybe right now, he's inviting you too. Not to perform, not to strive, just to come back to the quiet room, the one without applause, the one where no one's watching. That's where he's waiting. That's where it begins. Again.